For our project today, we're going to be talking about the role of government in economic development in the United States. To kick us off, I'm going to be starting talking about the federal government. So firstly, I'm going to talk about monetary policy. So monetary policy refers to what the Federal Reserve does to influence the amount of money and credit in the US economy. The objectives of monetary policy are maintaining stable prices, promoting maximum employment, and maintaining long-term interest rates. The federal funds rate is a rate at which commercial banks borrow and lend their excess reserves to each other overnight. Any changes up or down in this rate affect borrowing costs for households. So when interest rates go down, households are more likely to buy goods and services, and businesses are more likely to expand, and vice versa. Additionally, when interest rates go down, businesses can hire more workers, therefore expanding and boosting employment. The discount rate is an interest rate charged by the Fed to commercial banks for short-term loans. With this being said, the Fed is the lender of last resort. The Federal Open Market Committee is a branch of the Federal Reserve, is the monetary policy making body. It is responsible for open market operations, including buying and selling securities. The FOMC manages the nation's money supply so that when the Fed has changed the interest rates, that is a result of the FOMC regular meetings. So there is expansionary and contractionary monetary policy. Expansionary monetary policy is used to expand the supply of money to boost spending during economic slowdowns or recessions, and is based on the ideas of Keynesian economics. Contractionary monetary policy is the opposite of that, in which it decreases the money supply to combat inflation or maintain stable prices. Contractionary policies are used in times of extreme inflation, hyperinflation, or when there has been a period of a lot of capital investment fueled by the prior expansionary monetary policies. So the federal government took a huge role in boosting the economy during the COVID-19 pandemic, which caused quite a recessionary economy for us. So for the stimulus payments, the federal government passed 3 major pieces of legislation to provide financial relief to individuals and families. These stimulus packages, for the 3 of them, totaled over $850 billion since the CARES Act in March of 2020. Stimulus payments were adjusted per dependent per family and based upon qualifying annual income. Additionally, the federal government provided aid to local and state governments. The Treasury Department provided relief through pieces of legislation like the Capital Projects Fund, the Homeowner Rescue Assistance, and the American Rescue Plan to help them absolve the repercussions of the pandemic. Additionally, they provided unemployment benefits, and the CARES Act expanded the state's ability to provide unemployment insurance for workers that were impacted by COVID-19. And small businesses were also given assistance from the federal government. The Payment Protection Program, or PPP, offered loans to small businesses and nonprofits to keep those workers employed. The Economic Industry Disaster Loans, or EIDL, help small businesses and nonprofits that need help for financial obligations and to pay off their operating expenses. The SBA debt relief, another example, program paid off certain loans that were dispersed to small businesses prior to the pandemic. So those are just a few examples of what the federal government has done to boost the economy since the COVID-19 pandemic.
So let's now talk about fiscal policy, which refers to the use of government spending and tax policies to influence the economy, especially the macroeconomic aspect of the economy. And that includes aggregate demand, employment, inflation, and the economic growth. Fiscal policy is contrasted with monetary policy, which is conducted by the central banks, not the government. Fiscal policy is largely based on the ideas developed by John Keynes, who argued that economic recessions are due to deficiency in consumer spending. Keynes believed that governments can regulate economic output by adjusting spending and tax policies to make up for the deficiencies arising from the private sector. His theories defied classical economics assumptions that economic swings were self-correcting. Pessimism and uncertainty among consumers and businesses can lead to economic recessions and depressions. On the other hand, optimism and excessive exuberance during good times can lead to an overheated economy. There are two types of fiscal policy. There is the contractionary policy and the expansionary policy. Contractionary policy is utilized when facing high inflation rates. To stabilize the economy, to stabilize the overheated economy, the government does this by increasing taxes, reducing spending, and cutting public jobs, even to the extent of creating a temporary recession. Contractionary policy is characterized by budget deficits, by budget surpluses, excuse me. This policy is unpopular for politicians, so what is done instead is usually a contractionary monetary policy of raising interest rates and reducing the money supply and credit to control inflation. As shown in the graph, we have the real GDP on the x-axis and the price level on the y-axis. A shift inward is needed to move the economy to its long-run stable levels. So now let's switch to the expansionary policy, which is used when an economy is in a recession. To stimulate the economy, the government can increase spending, reduce taxes, and hire more people. When taxes are low, people tend to spend more money for consumption or investment. This higher demand leads companies to hire more people, which in turn decreases unemployment. This would result in a shortage in labor due to the fierce competition between companies, which causes wages to go up. Usually, increased spending is favored to lower taxes. For example, building more highways increase employment and demand. The long-run effects of expansionary policy is higher inflation, higher interest rate, and trade deficit. This graph on the right shows that when an economy is in a recession, an outward shift in aggregate demand is required to reach the long-run stable levels. Expansionary policy is characterized by budget deficit, as well as the fact that it lowers or even eliminates the private spending. Politicians like to use expansionary policies to make them more popular.
Okay, so in this part of the presentation, we will talk about how states impact the economic development in the US. So to start, states have the capacity to play a key role in economic policymaking and therefore in economic development of the state itself. The national economic policy integrates different levels of governments. Therefore, this allows state governments to develop their policies under the influence of federal programs. In addition, the federal fiscal system connects different levels of governments by allowing them to serve funding and other administrative tasks that they are key for the development of number of programs. These programs are structured through taxes and fees. Moreover, states are responsible for implementing federal policies. All the federal programs developed by the federal government depend on interaction between different levels of government. As stated in the article State Economic Development Policies and National Economic Growth from Dubnik, Fayok, and Mitchell, state development policy competition reduces the cost of manufacturing goods in the United States and increases the competitiveness of the United States producers by increasing national efficiency. Through a variety of means and mechanisms, states have become active participants in efforts to improve the US position in the world economy. So let's move to the next slide. An example of how states can conduct economic development is through public institutions such as the EDA, the Economic Development Administration. The EDA provides economic and financial assistance to states and regions with the purpose of fostering economic growth, innovation, and entrepreneurship. They a well-recognized American Rescue Plan. Now, in this last slide, we'll talk about an example of how EDA interacts with the states. For instance, in fiscal year 2019, EDA invested nearly $650,000 in constructing a training facility for electrical power lines workers in Wilmington, North Carolina. This investment generated 200 jobs and generated nearly $6 million in private investment. So this is a clear example of how public institutions and states are talk with each other to help developing a more economy in the United States. Thank you.
Okay, so now Inigo has given us a very good example of a state agency that invests in the marketplace with the money they have. And basically the investment of the state on economic development can be divided in three groups: marketplace, workforce, and community, in that order of importance. Okay, so the marketplace is basically the most important part of state investment, because at the end of the day, what creates jobs, what creates wealth, and what makes the economy flow is our businesses. So that's where they invest, like a very good part of the state that the money has. And they do this through business assistance and tax incentives. Business assistance, they use general business support, which is basically helping companies in which are like in very different situations. It could be from just a startup that wants to start their business, or a company which is like very successful, but it's not like in its best moment. Like, for example, with COVID-19, with this outbreak, they had to help and give assistance to a lot of companies. Then we have a financing assistance, which is basically the EDA is an agency of financing assistance. And they do this through loans, equity, or direct subsidies. Like either one of that options always works for businesses. And finally, they have another way of business assistance, which is state government procurement and facilities, which consists on giving buildings or infrastructures to companies, like public buildings to private companies, or just like with their investment, like with what the state itself does, like with the service it gives, they create a lot of marketplace around it. And secondly, we have the tax incentives, which is like the most important part of it, because actually location matters, as we can see on this picture. And it is very important to be a state which is competitive, in taxes, because they have different taxation systems. And as a state, you can compete with other states to accumulate the biggest number of companies that you can. And North Carolina is a very good example of it, because we have a very beneficial taxative system for companies. A lot of companies come here and are headquartered here because of that. Then we have the investment in the workforce, which is another very important part, and that's interfering on the workers themselves. And they have different ways of investment in this, investing in this, which is occupational and job training. And basically they focus that on sector strategies and partnerships, which is training workers for a particular industry. They have customized training, which is basically financial assistance and training, like giving financial assistance to individuals or companies so that they can get training, like very specific training that the state couldn't give. So they financially. And then there are these workforce intermediaries, which is who are people that basically they build strategic partnerships and they promote like the hiring between different companies. Like they're kind of a networking public intermediary. And finally, we have investment on community, which is the thing we see the most: transportation infrastructure, electricity and telecommunications, and education investment. Those are the ones that we get to see like most. And here we can see how the state investment is very important, because here we have the distribution of federal, state, and local dollars in North Carolina public education. And we can see that the state actually accounts for more than the 60% of the investment on education. So we can see how important this can be. And this is what explains that North Carolina has such a good public school and public university system. Thank you.
So we've talked a little bit about federal, a little bit about state. Now we're going to move into local government. Obviously, local government, there's no Fed, there's no agencies like Inigo was talking about. There's no policies really, but it really is very important. Local government is really important in economic development to their communities. So next slide. So local governments across the country comprise one of the nation's largest industries. A lot of people don't realize how vast and how broad local governments are in economic development. So first, let's talk about what comprises local government. Many people think about local government as a town or a city, but local government can be a city, a town, municipality, individual counties, school districts, just to name a few. There's local governments really can be a whole lot sort of things. Going off of that, 1 in 7 workers in the U.S. economy actually work for local governments. It's about 19 million people. That's a big chunk of the workforce working for local governments. More people work actually in local government than in other industries such as manufacturing, construction, hospitality, retail, and trade. So next slide. Like I said, there's no policies and stuff like that when it comes to local government initiatives and economic development, and that oftentimes is a reason for local government economic development initiatives to be overlooked. State and federal governments oftentimes are kind of overshadow and push local governments off to the side, off to the back. However, local government economic policies oftentimes affect their citizens and their communities more so than that of state and federal governments. Like I said, there's a really local governments are overshadowed, and with the low awareness of local government importance on economic development, voter turnout is really a huge problem in local elections. Across the country, only about 27% of voters participate in local elections. So only 27% of people really have a voice or seem to care about their economic development within their communities. With that being said, turnout in the 2020, last year's federal election cycle, was over 66%. So why is there such a large disparity between that of local governments, which oftentimes impact citizens more than federal governments? So next slide. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about what kind of services, what policies, how does local government impact economies and help develop economies. So like Inigo was saying earlier, schools. Local governments are responsible for public school systems, as well as higher education, such as community colleges and universities. There's a positive correlation between education and economic development, and that's something that local government is so important. That's a reason why it's so important. Off of that, local government are crucial in the management and maintenance of infrastructure, roads, bridges, stuff like that. Also, local government, they're important in their waste management and collection initiatives, as well as administration of social security or social insurance initiatives, pension programs, and finally Medicaid and Medicare administration. That's something that local governments take a role in and provide. That being said, local government expenditures account for nearly 19% of total US GDP. So that's really hard to think about, but 20% of all US GDP comes from spending by local governments. On account of that, about 21% of personal income comes from local government expenditures. 21% of all money made in the United States, all income in the United States comes directly from local governments. Local governments spend trillions in each year purchasing goods and services, oftentimes from private sector businesses. A lot of times when you think about local government, you think about public, but you don't really think about how local governments react and work with private sector businesses to help stimulate economies. That being said, local governments oftentimes enlist the aid of private contractors, and their private contractors are a huge asset to local government development. Like I said, public spending and public expenditures is something that you think about, but also private is really a huge part of local government economic development. Stuff like building new schools, as well as local roads, county roads, stuff like that. Oftentimes that work is not done through the works of local government. Rather, it's contracted out and many times done by public or private companies rather. That being said, local governments always are purchasing materials and supplies, motor fuel for their fleets, electricity, natural gas, books and paper products, software, as well as chemicals to help keep their economies moving. So, yep. Thank you for your time. I'm Hayden Bingham.
Thank you very much. I'm Inigo Ibarra.
Thanks for your attention. I'm Iñigo Rocamora.
Thanks. My name is Danielle Allen.
Thank you all. I'm Adele Gamdi.